My name is John J. Gordari. I'm 26 years old, and I work at a previously local coffee shop. I say previously local because I don't think I'm anywhere close to that place. Let me start from the beginning. I was working as a cashier that day and taking orders when I saw a person across the street. I didn't think anything of it till hours later when we had little activity and I saw that they were still there. Out of curiosity, I asked the other cashier if he saw the person as well. As they turned up to look at them, they looked confused. "Weren't they standing there like 3 hours ago?" he asked. I replied with a shrug and told him that I was going to check on them. As I headed out the door, I turned round to see my co-workers gathering behind the counter. I turned back and took a long look at them. They were wearing a black trench coat, a pair of dirty sneakers, and a baseball cap that looked like it had sat on his head his entire life. "Hey, guy, are you all good? You've been standing there for hours now," I called out to him from across the street. He didn't move or show any signs of hearing me. Hesitantly, I walked across the street, and at this moment I know why my parents told me to look both ways before crossing the street, because at that moment I was struck by a semi going well over the speed limit. I don't remember much of that, but what I do remember is that I didn't feel a thing and the strange man lifted his head slightly and I saw a ghostly white face and the smile of a man who had no sympathy left. I remember hearing the sounds of my co-workers gathering around me. One of them was calling the police, and for a short while I could open my eyes. I saw the blood starting to pool around me and people standing over me, but the thing I remember most clearly was the other cashier was looking around. And I didn't realise this till later, but he was looking for the guy, which implies he either ran or disappeared. I woke up later in a hospital room, surrounded by all sorts of equipment and many tubes running from my body. I took a good long look at myself. My right arm and leg were both broken and strung up from the roof. I tried to move my head, but pain shot through my body like electricity. My neck was in a brace. I could still barely move it, but it still hurt to move, so I just moved my eyes and not my head. I looked forward and saw a few x-rays. They were pictures of a leg, a neck, and I think the last one was an arm. But it looked like a glass table that had been in an earthquake. As an educated guess, I think they were my x-rays. My leg was broken right in the place where it meets the hip, and my neck wasn't broken, but from what I could tell, something wasn't right. I tried to call out for any nurses or a doctor, but I couldn't produce any sounds. It's a strange feeling when your brain tells you to do something but you can't. It gives you this feeling of confusion and fear. After this whole ordeal with not being able to yell, I remembered that the hospitals have a button to call a nurse. I used my left hand to feel for it, and I didn't find one. But either way, I heard the door to my right open. Something about the footsteps didn't sound right. They sounded uneven, or out of time. I don't remember. Whoever they were walked over to my bed and started fiddling with the equipment next to me, and for some reason I didn't alert them I was awake, but as they were leaving I must have pushed the button on the bed somehow, because the next thing I knew there was a clatter on the wall and whoever was in my room stumbled over to the wall, never looking at me, and picked up the button and set it back on my bed. They started to walk over to the door, but they stopped at the foot of the bed. And for some reason I closed my eyes like I was sleeping, but opened my left eye just enough to see out of it. The nurse turned to face me, or at least turned her head to me, because she had no face. Out of fear for what would happen to me if I did anything, I just sat in the bed and watched as she walked to the door and out into the hall. After a long time, I finally relaxed. Then I started to realise the true scale of my danger and I let out a silent scream. I'll spare you the day-to-day, but after a week or so of the faceless nurses, I became desensitised to it and I just waited for the nurses to leave my room. They removed my neck brace after a month or so, and I heard from just outside my door some muttering that didn't even sound like a language, but I could make out one word: miraculous, which was probably referring to my recovery. Not long after they removed my neck brace, they removed my leg cast. I think after a year in the hospital, I finally worked up the courage to yell out to the nurses, but no one came. Then I tried the button again. No luck. After that, I realized they don't come when called. They come when they want to. At that, I moved my right arm with my left, which hurt to high hell, but I had to. I threw my legs over the bed and pushed myself up, but instantly I fell to the ground, which I probably should have expected after sitting in a bed for a year and then some. I pulled myself up with all my might and threw myself back into the bed, and for the next 3 or so months I threw myself out of the bed trying to build my strength, and eventually I did. I taught myself how to walk again. Slowly I would make my way to the door, then back again. One day, I tried the doorknob, only to find that it was locked. Each day I tried to open that damn door, but nothing would come of it. I eventually was able to run and walk like I was before the truck. I had a great idea one day to use the bed as a ram against the door. I grabbed the foot of the bed and I pulled it forward. It slid with ease as I twisted and started pushing it at the door with great speed, and within seconds I slammed into the head of the bed as it slammed into the door. I pulled it back to the wall again and tried again, but still nothing came of it. I tried for days, but then I had a great thought. What if I pushed the bed at the door when the nurse opens it? And that's what I did. I waited. She didn't come for weeks, but when she opened that door I was ready, and I pushed off the wall and slid at the door and slammed into the nurse, and just before I went through the door I jumped off the bed and started running down the hall. As I ran I heard a shrill shriek from behind me, and I turned to see what happened. Apparently those things are incredibly fragile, because when I looked at it, it was bleeding this purple liquid from where I hit it with the bed. It collapsed to the ground with a dull thud. I continued to run without stopping, and as I ran through the halls, the nurses didn't try to touch me. They just kept moving on with their day. As I ran, the walls and rooms became more and more run down and decrepit. As I ran past these destroyed rooms, I saw those things forming from the walls. And these ones were aggressive, but at least for this part they only came from the rooms. When I made it to the first floor, the hospital practically collapsing, this floor the nurses didn't only come from the rooms, they came from everywhere. I started running down the hallway, but as I did, the arms scratched and clawed at me. Some of them tried to grab me, but I was running so fast they couldn't get a good grip on me. I ran past the reception desk and through the doors, and when I made it outside, there was nothing. As far as I could tell, the hospital was the only thing that existed there. I didn't care though, because I just ran and ran and ran, without stopping. I made it so far that I could barely make out the outline of the hospital in the distance. I sat down in the empty field, and eventually fell asleep or passed out. It was one of those two. I eventually woke up, in the one place I didn't want to. The same hospital I first woke up in. Somehow, I knew I wasn't home. I looked around the room trying to get my vision in focus. As I was doing this, I noticed a person sitting in a chair next to my bed. I still couldn't see, but I could make out a baseball hat, a dirty black coat, and a pair of dirty sneakers. I slowly looked up to his face, but I didn't need my vision to focus to know who was sitting next to me. September 6th, 1991. The dark cloud that hung over our little city. That was the day Sarah Tanning vanished. Everyone in Hereford and their dogs know how the story unfolds. That evening, Sarah left her home around 8 p.m. to spend the weekend at her grandmother's in London. But she never arrived. Her car was found by the West Mercia Police Department 2 days later, parked on the side of a country road. The Ford Taurus was locked, with her purse and bag of clothes on the driver's seat. Her trail went cold from there. That was until 2017, when a local 23-year-old man led the West Mercia police search team deep into the woods, straight to the exact spot where Sarah Tanning's remains laid, buried under 6 feet of dirt. That man was me, Eli Azari, If you're a Hereford local, you might be familiar with my name. Strange stories are contagious and they spread faster than wildfire. Not a day after the incident, my name was all over the local newspaper. Hereford man solves 26 years missing person case. That's what the headlines read. But they were wrong. I wasn't the one who solved the case. It was Sarah. She found justice for herself from beyond the grave. When the police dug up her body, the DNA on her coat was analysed and a suspect was later identified, charged and eventually sentenced for her murder. Justice was delivered, and it was all thanks to Sarah. 5 years have gone by, and still I can bring back every detail of that day in the forest. On that early winter morning, I heard Sarah's voice whistling through the trees, and it told me where to find her bones. Voices are important, and they can tell you a great deal about a spirit. Some of the voices I hear in my head are sweet, soothing, easy on the ear like a nice song. Some are scratchy, raspy, almost primal. Sarah's voice was quiet and brittle, like she could have crumbled into tears at any moment. I'll tell you the story of what happened when I first heard that forlorn voice. This is the same story I told the detectives in the interview room when they asked how I discovered Sarah Tanning's remains in the woods. And it's the same story I told anyone else who cared to listen. Many people listened. Not a lot of people, believe me though. I don't blame them. Spirits are something you need to see to believe. But know that everything I'm about to tell you is the truth. Every word of it. This is a story about the dead souls who wander our earth, searching for homes they can no longer return to. A story about how the line between our world and the afterlife is thinner than we think. For me to tell you this story, I'll need to retrace my steps back to the beginning, back to 27 Brigham Street, back to the morning where it all started. 8th of September 2017. It was supposed to be a normal morning, a morning like any other. I woke up to the sound of classical music. Debussy's Clair de Lune drifted through my headphones as I climbed out of bed. The moment I took my headphones off, the whispers began. I could hear the dim mingle of voices echoing from that far-off empty corridor in my mind. The medication Dr. Burton prescribed me usually made the voices go away, but they'd always return. They were always there, waiting, whispering at the edge of my hearing. Most of the time, I could never make out what they were saying. But I was used to the noise. 15 years had given me enough time to adjust. The voices in my head were now as routine to me as breathing or blinking. It wasn't a perfect life, but I still had my sanity, and that was enough for me. I nearly lost what little sanity I had that morning. I made my way to the bathroom to freshen up, feeling a faint stabbing pain in the back of my head. I tried my best to ignore it for now. I'd find some paracetamol later. When I looked into the mirror, I saw a face that I could barely recognize. My eyes were sunken and bloodshot like I'd been crying. I was. Crying in my sleep, I thought to myself. But why? I couldn't remember. The events of my dreams all seemed to mingle and blur into one another. It's probably just another nightmare, I guessed. I had been seeing more of them lately. I always died in my nightmares. Brutal, tragic deaths. But the strange part was that I'd never die as myself. I'd always die as someone else, with a different face. Yes, it was only a nightmare, but still I couldn't shake the feeling I was forgetting something. Something important. Call it a hunch. I took off my clothes and stumbled into the shower. I switched the temperature to warm and leaned forward, one hand against the wall, letting the water stream down my back. I felt it again. A needling headache behind my right ear. It was worsening. I winced, raising a hand to touch the spot where I felt a sharp electric pain. That's how I found the wound. When I looked at my hand afterwards, it was smudged with a red paste. The blood streamed down onto the wet shower floor and slipped through the drain, mingling with the water. Suddenly, I remembered what my nightmare was about. The memories all flooded back to me in brief glimpses. I closed my eyes, and the horror of my nightmare replayed itself in my mind. I was crying, running through the woods, feeling adrenaline pumping through my veins. "Help!" I yelled at the top of my lungs, but the wind drowned out my voice and no one could hear me. Footsteps were closing in on me, growing louder and louder by the second. Then a hand grabbed my arm and swung me around. It happened so fast. In a blur, I could almost hear the hammer cracking against my skull, a thud, and then darkness, and then nothing. My eyes snapped open. I froze, feeling my heart sink. I felt like someone was twisting my organs. I tried steadying my breathing to stop the thunder in my heart. What is going on? I looked at the blood on my hands and sudden realization struck me like a cannonball. My nightmares were seeping into reality. I tried to wash out the wound with running water. "Don't worry, that blood isn't yours," I suddenly heard one of the voices in my head saying. It was so quiet, I almost had to strain to hear it. "You're reliving my death, the pain I suffered that night. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and the pain will go away." I did what the voice told me. When I opened my eyes, the sharp stabbing pain was gone. I felt around the back of my head. There was no blood there, no wound. I was only imagining things. I'm losing it. I stumbled out of the shower, dried myself with the towel, and dashed to my bedroom. I flung open my wardrobe and picked out a large coat, a pair of jeans, and Doc Martens. I was out of the front door quicker than a bat out of hell. I needed to see Dr. Burton right away. The blistering wind whipped and lashed against my face as I stepped out into the cold, pulling my collar up. I looked up at the morning sky. Clouds gathered above, and snowflakes drifted lazily in the air, dancing to the tune of the wind. Chills ran down my tingling spine as I rushed down the street. The streets appeared deserted, and lonesome figures that I passed along the way were all caught up in their own ordinary lives. As I hurried, I desperately tried to flag down a taxi. I wasn't far from Dr. Burton's clinic, but I'd sure get there quicker if someone gave me a lift. No one stopped. But it is then. I made it to the 469 bus stop and approached an old lady who was sitting under the shelter. "Excuse me, miss, do you know what time the next bus is due?" No response. She flat out ignored me. No, not ignored. She didn't even seem to register that I was standing there, talking to her. I tried again. Miss, sorry to disturb you, but do you know when the next bus is coming?" Silence. I waved a hand over her face. She didn't even flinch. It was almost as if she couldn't see me. I was invisible. Bus 469 arrived a moment later, and as the passengers queued up to board, they slipped through me, in the same way grains of sand might slip through a clenched fist. "They can't see you," that voice in my head told me. "Think of it like a veil. There's a thin veil separating them from us, the world of the living from the dead." My heart dropped to the ground. "Us? Am I dead too?" The voice let out a chuckle. "No, you're not dead, Eli. Your soul still belongs to the world of the living. You're just a visitor here. A guest of sorts." A rush of relief flooded over me. I watched as the bus drifted away into the distance. How did I end up here, in this place? I thought to myself. And how do I know all of this is even real? My mind keeps playing tricks on me. I don't even know what's real anymore. It is real. All of this. Even the voices you hear in your head. But how is that possible? The voice in my head didn't answer the question. Follow the wind. That's all it said. I could feel the air current shifting. I moved, letting the motion of the wind carry me forward. The drifting wind led me to the middle of a dark forest. Tall, bony pines stretched up like thin arrows into the sky. among the dark, swaying trees, I saw something that chased the sleep out of my eyes. The snow was heavy, but I could still make out dark figures stalking between the trees. They moved with a slow, shuffling, awkward gait, dragging their feet through the deep snow, one laboured step at a time. I descended down a slope to get a closer look at them. I approached one of them, a young boy. He must have been around 11 or 12. He looked at me absent-mindedly, as motionless as a mannequin. There was a bullet hole in his forehead. His eyes were a dull blue, and they had a hideous veil over them that chilled my bones. I looked at the others. They all had the same pale blue eyes with no iris, so empty and wide. It was like they were staring at me from the hollow eye sockets of an old skull. I felt myself shivering, and it wasn't from the cold. Some of them had mangled faces, slithers of brain matter and bone plastered on them. Some of their heads dangling from the bloody stump that was their neck. Others were missing their arms. Terrified, I edged back, ready to run. I jolted when I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around and saw it was another one of them. Her tousled blonde hair danced to the wind. She had a smile on her face, but those icy blue eyes distracted me from it. Dried blood clung to her hair and fell across her forehead. "They won't hurt you," she said. "They just want to find their way home. That's all they want. They've been looking for years. Some of them probably don't even know they're dead." Her voice. It was the same voice I'd heard in my head earlier on. "Who are you?" I asked, trying not to let her hear my anxiety. "Well, I was Sarah Jennifer Tanning," she said. "Names don't matter much in this place." I looked over at the lumbering figures. They were mindlessly shuffling around in circles, whispering gibberish to themselves. "All the voices I hear in my head, they come from them, don't they? They come from the spirits of the dead." "Yeah. Some of them died even before your great-grandparents. They're stuck here, forever, wandering in this limbo." She paused. She looked across at me and I stopped dead in my tracks. "I don't know how, but you're able to hear us and see us too. You have some sort of gift, or curse, depending on how you look at it. Is this hell? I don't know where this is. My guess is it's a place trapped between the world of the living and the afterlife, a middle ground. No man's land. Bitter souls who can't find rest linger here, unable to move on." She started walking. The twigs and leaves snapped and cracked under her barefoot as she went. People are angry when their loved ones pass away. The dead are angry too, and upset. Regretful about the words left unsaid. She suddenly stopped. "I'm sorry that I brought you here. I'll help you get back home. I just wanted to ask you a favour. Well, two." She looked down at the ground and pointed at it. "My body was buried here, right under this patch of earth that I'm standing on. The police were never able to find it in the end." She sighed. "Please let them know I'm buried here. Give my family closure. Let me get a proper burial so I can finally find peace." I nodded. "I'll do that. Second, please tell my son I love him. He was only 8 when I died. He's probably a little older than you by now. His name's James." She choked up a little. Tell him I never stopped thinking about him. Not ever. He probably won't believe you spoke to me. Just tell him I said, keep singing with the birds. He'll know what that means. Promise me you'll do that." "I promise." She smiled at me. It was the softest smile, and it nearly tore my heart apart. "Thank you, Eli," she said, cupping my hands in hers. Then suddenly she began to disappear, fading away like a dandelion drifting in the wind. I watched as all the other spirits faded away too. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I was alone. I was surrounded by the same tall pines, but it had stopped snowing. The sky seemed to be clearing up, and I saw a faint breath of sunlight escaping through the clouds. I was back in the world of the living. My world. I looked down at the ground beneath me and took a deep breath. Then I reached in my pocket and dialed 999 for the police. Emergency. Which service do you require? Fire, police, or ambulance? Police, please. Yes. A woman went missing back in 1991. Sarah Tanning? I cleared my throat. I think I know where she is. I lost a part of myself when Lauren died. We'd been together for 5 years, married for almost a year, when a red truck slammed into her while she was walking to work. They say the driver had fallen asleep. I kept dreaming about her last moment, even though I did not witness it myself. The truck speeds towards the sidewalk. There's nothing anybody can do but watch. And just before the moment of impact, time freezes. Lauren is frowning, phone in hand, unaware of the approaching danger. Her thumbs hover above the phone screen. The truck runs her over and I wake up screaming. It was the same nightmare every single night. Soon after her death, everything else in my life started collapsing one by one. I started drinking heavily, lost my job, fell out with my parents, avoided my friends, crashed my car. The list goes on. I was in a dark place and people around me were faceless shadows. I didn't care about anything anymore. That's when they noticed me. I don't know exactly who or what they are, but I'm pretty sure they were circling around me for some time, like vultures. I started noticing these odd people. They were watching me from the distance at first. They looked sick, with pale skin and dark circles around their eyes. There was always at least one of them wherever I went, on the street I live in, or outside the grocery store, or on some balcony looking down, following me with their tired eyes. It was a Sunday, I think, but when you don't work, every day is a Sunday, when one of them finally approached me. It was a bony old man. He still had a few patches of grey hair holding onto his scalp. He looked like a walking skeleton with skin attached, swimming inside a shirt that was a few sizes too big. At first, I thought he was going to ask me for money. "Don't answer their questions," the old man said. His voice was weak, but I heard him clear enough. "What are you talking about?" I asked. The man didn't answer. He stared at me for a long moment with his grey, clouded eyes, and then just walked away. Fast forward a few days. I was sitting in a bar drinking away my savings when another weird guy took a seat next to me. He was a large and round man in a black suit, the polar opposite to the old dude that had given me the cryptic warning. My brain struggled to think if I'd seen him somewhere before. Maybe he was at the funeral. He chose the seat next to me on the counter, even though the bar was pretty much empty. "Vodka," he said to the bartender. "And a drink for my friend here too." I thanked him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jonas," I said. "You?" He smiled and extended a beefy hand. And by God, that thing was huge. For a drunken moment, I thought I should just shake his forefinger like a baby. "You could call me Lou." Lou was bloated, like a balloon animal. He wheezed after every sentence, and it looked like there was another man underneath all that fat, trapped and struggling to breathe. After a few moments of sitting in silence, Lou asked, "Would you like to speak to her again?" "Excuse me? What?" "With Lauren," Lou said. "What would you say if you could speak to her again?" I stared at him, stunned. Perhaps he was one of her clients, I rationalized, or just someone she knew. Still, I thought it was an odd question. "You knew Lauren?" I asked. Lou licked his lips and repeated the question. What would you say if you could speak to her again? The barkeep was polishing the counter and I followed his hand motions, mesmerised. My thoughts kept drifting to Lauren, the truck, the suddenness of her death. I sighed. I never had the chance to properly say goodbye. You know what was the last thing I said to her? I complained that we were out of milk. Can you imagine that? Milk. Lou nodded. I felt something change as I finished the sentence. I became somehow lighter, physically. Maybe finally talking to someone about it triggered some sort of relief, or perhaps it was just the alcohol dulling my pain. What if I told you could speak to her again? He said. I raised an eyebrow. What? Are you some kind of a medium or something? I don't buy into that. Lou forced a slight smile. He was going around the rim of his glass with his giant index finger. Then he turned to me and cleared his throat. The voice that came out of his mouth was not his own. My heart jumped. It was Lauren. Her voice was filled with panic. Jonas? Jonas? My jaw dropped. What the hell was that? Ventriloquism? I almost wanted to respond to her. I felt as if she was really there in front of me. I jumped to my feet and grabbed his jacket. Are you messing with me? How did you do that? How did you copy my wife's voice? I said. Lou chuckled. Calm down, cowboy. I didn't copy anything. It was Lauren. The barkeeper shot me a warning glance. I sat back down, trying to calm myself. Lou was silent, watching me. My head was racing. I realised I was squeezing my glass hard. I was seconds away from smashing it over his head. Lauren's dead, I said through clenched teeth. Now you have 5 seconds to explain to me how you did that, or... Lou put up his fat fingers defensively. Okay, easy. It's what I do. I offer my services to people who need them. For a price, of course. Prove it then. Prove that that was her, I said, realising that I desperately wanted it all to be true. Doesn't work like that. First you gotta answer our question, and then you get to ask. Okay? I noticed the weird shift to our. But that was the least unusual thing about this man, I guess. His deep-set blue eyes looked at me unblinking. Fine, ask away, I said. Do you dream of her? That's your question? Of course I do. Every damn night. I sighed and took a sip of my drink. I dream about the accident. I see the truck. I see her. And I think if she wasn't holding her phone that maybe she would have noticed the truck coming. I try to warn her, but in the dream I have no voice. I'm powerless. Again, I felt an odd sense of relief. Like weight coming off of my body. The bar stool beneath me felt somewhat harder and uncomfortable. Lou smiled and waited. It was my turn now. All right, I said. A few days after we got engaged, Lauren told me a secret, and she swore me not to tell anyone. What was it? There was no way anyone would know that, other than Lauren. No way. Lou opened his mouth, and for a moment there was nothing. But then her voice came again. When I was 17, I killed my dog, Coco. On accident while reversing out of the driveway. I was scared and told my parents that a car ran him over and I found him like that. I stared in disbelief. It was her. It was Lauren. I felt a jolt of excitement for the first time in weeks. I raised my arm to call for another round of drinks. The movement felt so weird. Then I noticed it. My right hand was thinner than before, way thinner. The bones on the back of my hand were more pronounced. My other hand, in contrast, looked normal. I rotated the scrawny hand in front of my face, staring at it in confusion. When I pulled back the sleeve of my jumper, which was sagging more than it should, there was another surprise waiting. The forearm also got significantly thinner. It dawned on me. I looked back at Lou. This is the price? He nodded. There was a silence for a while as I took it all in. The barkeep didn't seem to notice or care about anything weird going on. His eyes were glued to his phone most of the time, his thumb endlessly scrolling. Then came Lou's next question. "Do you ever think you'll meet someone like her again?" If I answer, I thought, he'll take another part of me. But I wanted to hear her voice again, badly. I fought with myself not to answer. Lou repeated the question. "Stop asking me," I said. "I don't want your services anymore." Lou just kept repeating the question over and over like a robot, pausing after each one to wait for the answer. "Do you think you'll ever meet someone like her again?" I stared at the array of bottles behind the counter, trying to ignore him. I could sense a tiny bit of frustration in his voice each time he repeated the question. Lou then paused and opened his mouth wide. Out came Lauren's voice again. She was sobbing. "Jonas, babe, why won't you speak to me? Jonas?" "Lauren? Lauren?" I said. My heart was in pieces. The fat man closed his mouth and stared at me. "No, I don't think I'll ever meet someone like her. I don't want anybody else," I said. The feeling of lightness took over me again. When I shifted my weight, I felt like half the man I was a moment ago. I looked down to see my jeans getting baggy around my thighs. A small price to pay to hear her voice, I thought. "Now, let me speak to her," I said. Lou nodded and opened his mouth. "Jonas? Lauren, where are you?" I asked. I don't know. It's a cold place. I'm scared, Jonas." "I love you," I said. "I love you too. There's something I need to tell you, but I forgot what it was. It's important, I know it is." "What? What is it?" "It's difficult to think here, with all these cats constantly fighting." "Cats?" Lou interjected. "That's enough for now." I frowned at him. "Let me speak to her, damn you, whatever you are. What was that about cats? Where is she?" "Answer our question first," said Lou. He smiled. He had me in his palm and he knew it. "Would you like to visit her?" We stared at each other for a moment. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean what I say. You visit her, have a chat, come back." "Visit her where?" Lou paused and then repeated the question. "Would you like to visit her?" I wanted more than anything to have a chance to talk with Lauren again, but some part of me screamed not to do that. I wasn't afraid of losing more muscle and fat. Hell, I could live as a skeleton for all I care, if only there's a way I could be with her again. Lou kept repeating the question, hunger gleaming in his eyes. Just one word, and I would be with Lauren again. I was about to say yes, but before I could mouth the word, the screen of my phone came to life. It was a text message. From Lauren. I grabbed my phone and stared at it in disbelief. "Don't answer their questions. Stop talking." Panic and confusion started seeping in, but I knew I had to listen to Lauren's warning, no matter what. I did my best to ignore Lou and tried to pretend he wasn't there. It was difficult. Lou was repeating the question over and over. I didn't say anything. I didn't turn to look at him. When Lauren's voice came again from the man's mouth, pleading for me to come with her, I covered my ears with my hands. It was the longest hour of my life. At least it felt like an hour, but I don't know how much time actually had passed. Eventually, Lou got up and leaned close to my left shoulder. The last thing he said to me was, "We'll meet again. 2 more times." He went to the front door and I turned around to watch him exit. Bright daylight flooded the bar and for a brief moment I could see a crowd of people outside, living skeletons in sagging clothes, some even missing an eye or an arm. They waited for Lou and tugged on his sleeve pleadingly as soon as he stepped outside. The door closed and the bar was pleasantly dark again. The nightmares are now gone and my body recovered eventually. It took a while, but the muscle tissue grew back. The only thing that didn't revert to normal is my right hand. It's still bony and dry. I hide it with a glove whenever I can. If you'd like more content like this, please like and subscribe. She isn't me. Those 3 simple words on my screen, arranged just so, gave me the most profound sense of dread I had experienced to date. 9 letters and one overwhelming sinking feeling in my gut. I turned to Sophie as casually as I could muster. "Where's your phone, hun?" She swallowed, still looking at the TV. "I left it at Harriet's earlier. I was going to tell you tomorrow." "Don't worry, can't do anything about it now." Normally, she'd be glancing up and down between both screens. I never understood how she managed to split her focus between them. Yet here she was, eyes fixed on the movie in a way I'd never seen before, hardly even looking away to twirl noodles around her fork. "Fair enough," I murmured, trying to mask my unease. There was definitely something wrong with Sophie. Something felt off. Thinking back, she hadn't looked at me in the eye since she came home with dinner. She'd simply served up the chow mein and sat in front of the TV to wait for me. Maybe she was frustrated at having left her phone with her friend earlier. She's usually attached to the thing like an IV drip. Maybe she was feeling the withdrawal from her social media feed, but was too embarrassed to admit it. Maybe she too was hiding how she felt behind a mask of nonchalance. Maybe. I opened up the message again, checked the sender again to be sure. Sophie Mobile. Okay. It's just a prank, I told myself, half convinced. Just a cruel prank. They both know I have an anxiety disorder, and they're messing with me. Very funny, I wrote out. Give Sophie her phone back tomorrow, okay? Lowering my phone, I tilted my head to Sophie and offered a goofy smile, like we often do with each other in quiet and awkward moments. She didn't turn away from the TV. I could make out the half reflection of one eye in the side of her glasses. Aside from occasionally chewing a mouthful, she seemed vacant. My phone vibrated, my heart almost leapt onto the plate of noodles. Never before had I hidden anything from my wife, let alone whilst sharing a sofa with her. This was a new and difficult territory for me. I hoped she wouldn't notice me checking the text, or at the very least wouldn't comment if she saw. Excuses were not my strong suit. My mouth dry, I tilted my phone towards me, lit the screen, and that sinking feeling came back for round 2. The girl you're with isn't me. Swallowing my fear like a pill without water, I slowly thumbed out a reply. "Okay, Harriet, it's late. Drop it." Face firmly in the mask, I tried to strike up a conversation. "How was Harriet earlier?" "Fine." Fork raised, noodles in. "Chew." I nodded like it was no big issue and tried to turn my attention to the movie. Something Soph had chosen about a bunch of teenagers stranded at sea. They'd forgotten to lower the ladder before jumping off the boat for a swim. The realization had just struck them, and fear was starting to take hold. "Bet they're kicking themselves about the ladder," I offered. "Yeah." Another mouthful of noodles. She was definitely avoiding conversation. My pocket gave another subtle buzz. I carefully looked and wished I hadn't. "Harriet is dead. She killed her. Get out." A chill ran down my spine, strong enough to physically lift me to my feet. Sophie definitely noticed, tilting her head ever so slightly in my direction. "Where are you going?" I feebly threw back a "kitchen, get a drink," the best I could scramble together, the room beginning to spin as I left. I threw my plate onto the countertop with a crash and leaned over the kitchen sink, breathing heavy, convinced I was going to be sick. I ran the water cold and splashed the sweat from my face. Everything felt wrong. "Your drink?" I turned to find Sophie standing in the doorway, facing me for the first time that evening, but I was struggling to focus. Behind her, the kids in the water were panicking. Someone had been hurt and blood was spreading around the hapless group. "Your drink?" Sophie repeated, firmer this time. Her form came back into clear focus as she set down a glass of water, my own glass of water, untouched. The glass of water I'd left in the other room before departing to get a drink. Somehow, my stomach found somewhere lower to sink. As I stumbled for a response, my phone buzzed again. My hand instinctively reached for it, and to my dismay, Sophie noticed. "Who keeps texting you tonight?" she demanded, her stance rigid, her gaze burning right through me. Words wouldn't come. Emotion caught my eye. The plate of half-eaten chow mein I'd set down was shifting, pulsating. Among the noodles were dark worms, subtly squirming and undulating. The nausea returned in a crashing wave as I pictured them inside me, alive and writhing around, not knowing how many I'd already consumed. Clutching my gut as if to keep it from churning, I pointed at the plate. "What did you put in the food?" She didn't respond, but stepped closer to the kitchen counter and set the glass down. The water within shimmered unnaturally in the starker light of the kitchen, as if laced with glitter. Her eyes shone through her glasses as she leaned over the counter. "Have you had much to drink today?" "I think you're dehydrated." I ran. I swept the plate and glass off the counter in her direction and I ran without looking back. My knees were weak with whatever she had slipped into my food, but I made it to the garage, snatching up my car keys on the way. I scrambled into the front seat, slamming the door behind me and hitting the locks, just as Sophie, or not Sophie, tried the handle. I backed up against the passenger door, gasping for every breath. My chest was taut. Everything was spinning. I knew I was losing consciousness. I dropped the keys somewhere, and as much as I tried to reach for them, I found only bruises. Flailing my limp arm helplessly between the door and gearbox, I felt something trickle from the corner of my mouth. She stooped to glare at me through the driver's side window. Her glasses reflected the garage lights overhead, setting her eyes ablaze. For a moment, I thought of those stranded kids in the movie. How they must be huddling together in the blood about now, the sharks circling, waiting to strike. I thought of those sharks, and the darkness came. I awoke, my head a fog, to find the car locks and windows intact. A note sat on the windscreen, facing inwards, written with an unfamiliar hand. "Darling, I'm worried about you. Locked garage up, gone to Harriet's. Back soon. Stay there." I checked my phone. 3 texts. 1:40. "Tell me you're okay." 3:12. "She's here." 6:34. "Sorry about Harriet. Everything okay. Back soon. Stay there." I revved the car into life and floored it, pressing it against the garage door, the wheels spinning on the concrete floor. The door didn't budge. I backed up as much as the garage would allow and slammed my foot onto the accelerator. Metal met metal with a sickening screech, and the door hardly gave at all. Again I reversed and surged forward 3 times, 4, 5. I could see a crack of light as the door weakened. 6, 7. Daylight was flooding in. It would only take a few more. 8, 9. At number 10, the front end of my car made it through the garage door entirely. Jagged metal scraping against the windscreen. Maybe one more and I'd burst through those teeth and out of the shark's maw. As I backed up again, I saw the sight of legs through the door. She had returned. Not Sophie was just outside, watching. She stood in front of the garage door, steadfast and still blocking my path. Her position said one thing loud and clear. "You'll have to go through me." I almost hesitated. I tried to call Harriet, no answer. I thought about calling the police, but talked myself out of it. They wouldn't look too kindly on a fugitive rolling up in the murder weapon. The car somehow managed 30 miles until the crushed bodywork and hampered engine let it down. I imagine there are a few pieces of Not Sophie caught in the mess of metal. She was dragged along further than I'd expected. Abandoning the mess of vehicle by the roadside, I set off into the woods. The forest was deep, and I took a meandering route through. On the other side, I eventually came across a car rental company, took their most affordable option, and headed off in a different direction. Days have passed, and I haven't been tracked down. I've been listening attentively to the news. There hasn't been any mention of a horrific hit-and-run accident. I can only assume that means a victim hadn't been found. In my dreams, I see the red smear in the road I'd left behind. I see the misshapen husk of Not Sophie. I see a swirl of all those black worms she tried to feed me. I see her broken carcass haul itself upright, bent and disjointed. I see the worms fall from her open wounds. I can't keep going like this, living out of an overdue rental car, waking to screams that echo around the truck stops. I hardly recognize myself in the mirror. My eyes are sunken, my skin pale. My hair is coming out in clumps. I look hollow. I've never suffered from nosebleeds before, but it feels like I've always got a tissue in my hand, fighting a constant stream. Whatever damage those black worms had begun to cause, I doubt they're finished with me. I don't know what happened to my Sophie. I don't know what this thing was in her place. I need answers, or else I need this to be over. I need to go back. Wish me luck. If you would like more content like this, please like and subscribe. 1 year ago, my father-in-law tried to murder me. He planned it beautifully. The trip up to the cabin in the woods that his family owned, pushing me into the dried-up old well, pickpocketed my phone, left a gun within the well that gave me the option of killing myself instead of starving to death. His twisted version of mercy, I guess. Either way, he would have got away with it. He hadn't accounted for the lost dog, though. Hadn't thought that a couple would come looking for a beloved pet that had raced off after a deer. That they would find me, half dead from starvation and dehydration, holding the gun, contemplating it seriously after nearly 3 days in the well, fully aware that I was going to die of thirst before starvation. There had been no rain for days. When I woke up in hospital, my wife Samantha was by my side holding my hand, her beautiful face wet with tears. Despite my own physical pain, all I wanted to do was make her stop crying, so I softly took her hand and with great effort raised it to my lips and gave it a gentle kiss. "I was so worried about you. What happened to you?" she begged me, green eyes bright with tears. The nurse came in and took my vitals, then told my wife that she should leave me to sleep. I was glad for the rescue, because I knew once I revealed what had really happened to me, my wife's heart would break permanently. Her father had always been her favourite person. I met Samantha at work 3 years ago. She was the marketing executive where I was a software developer. We were both in our late 20s, and I knew within 10 minutes of our first conversation that I was going to marry her. She was bright, funny, clever, and it didn't hurt that she was absolutely gorgeous with bright green eyes and long red hair. 4 months into dating her, she met my family. I come from a massive family, where both my parents had 4 siblings. Each of them went on to have 5 kids together too. Our Sunday lunches are loud, raucous events at my folks' place, with at least 20 people in attendance. But Sam was utterly charmed by my family, and my parents and siblings adored her. She fit right in like the missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle. Everything was going so well, until Sam decided it was time for me to meet her only family member, her father. Cameron Joyce was a tall, burly man who dressed and looked like a lumberjack. He lived in a neighbourhood at the very edge of the suburbs, close to a big, wide forest. When he stiffly shook my hand, his blue eyes ice cold, a soft chill ran through me. After we walked into the 2-bedroom house behind him, the first red flag should have been that there were no photos of Sam's mother. Not one. In fact, If I truly thought about it, Sam never really spoke about her mother. I should have asked more questions about her, but I guess I always just assumed that the subject was too painful for her. The first time I thought her father was trying to kill me was a fleeting thought, which happened that visit. I distinctly heard Sam tell her father over the phone multiple times that I had a nut allergy, but when we sat down to eat, I started to feel my throat swell up. Sam's father watched me cough, slowly chewing his food. Of course, we had an EpiPen with us, but if we hadn't, I could be dead right now. Then it was the time right after our wedding when he knew I couldn't swim, but I'm 90% sure he pushed me into the lake when the three of us on the docks were looking at his boat. The third time was the charm though. If those hikers hadn't found me, I'm sure I would have died down in that well. You might be wondering why I chose to go to the cabin with a man I thought was trying to kill me. Because I really didn't think he was trying to kill me. My brain insisted that I had misread or misheard the situation, and both those incidents could have been accidents. Also, Sam was keen her father and her husband got along, and I just couldn't break her heart. I'll never forget the ride to go to the cabin. My father-in-law was a man of few words, so when he decided to tell me a story, I almost sighed with relief that I didn't have to keep talking to fill the dead air between us. He kept his eyes on the road and said, "There was once a boy who lived a happy life, with his family in the forest. It was him, his 3 brothers, his parents, his grandparents, his uncles and aunts, and all his cousins. He didn't know much about the world beyond his family home, but he had 1,000 things to do in the woods, so he never wondered. For a time, all was well, and as it should be. The boy and his family lived off the land, hunted and thrived. Until one day, on his 19th birthday, the boy saw the woman in white in the gut of the trees. Ethereal and shimmering, she glowed a white will-o'-the-wisp. When he asked his mother about her, she told him to stay away from the woman, that nothing good comes out of the woods on a sickle moon night. We were close to the cabin now, and as we approached it, a strange sort of feeling was beginning to crawl up my spine. A sense of something being wrong gripping me tightly. The boy listened to his mother. 2 days he did not go looking for the woman. On the 3rd night, he found himself outside the house, walking in the woods. As he drew closer, he saw the woman's face. Her gold hair shimmered all the way to her knees, ice blue eyes, and a lovely face that glowed with the promise of forever his mortal brain didn't understand. The woman offered him her hand. Entranced, he reached out and took it. He parked and turned off the engine of the car, but still wouldn't look at me. Instead, he stared ahead into the depth of the forest as he told me this eerie tale. The minute he took that hand, the thing claimed him. They found him a year later at the top of the mountain, living in a cave, naked and insane, speaking a strange tongue in a language which had to be made up. What was terrifying was that both of his legs from his knees downwards were gone. And yet, the wounds had been cauterized, and someone or something had clearly been feeding him. His parents brought him home and tried to help him recover his mind. The doctors fitted him with prosthetic legs he kept hidden away, but the boy was never really the same again. When he began to slowly speak again, he spoke of a woman with a skull instead of a face, a long skeletal crone's body, fangs instead of teeth, and clumps of white hair that fell out of her head and milk-white eyes, the eyes of a corpse. And then finally, the ear-piercing scream. He fell silent then. My skin crawling, I asked him, what happened to him? My father-in-law broke out of his trance and looked at me, his expression unreadable. Let me show you how to hunt. The trial was short. My father-in-law was caught in possession of my phone and several other items that suggested what he planned to do. His internet search history revealed extensive ways to murder someone. When they put Cameron Joyce in prison, my wife cried herself to sleep every night for a month. I think she blamed me for what happened, even though she would never say those words. I would catch her looking out from the apartment in the direction of the forest, which we could see clearly. She grew more and more forgetful, wouldn't go to work, would sleep all day. Some days she wouldn't even brush her hair. Her face grew more haggard, and sometimes when I saw her naked form in bed, in the moonlight, I could swear I saw her ribs through her translucent skin. Her sadness was going to devour her, and there was nothing I could do about it. One day I came home and she wasn't there. I looked out for her everywhere. I don't know how I knew it, but somehow I knew she would be at the cabin. I jumped into my car and sped there at full speed, not caring how many fines I'd have to pay. I got there just before dark, and I caught sight of her. She was naked, her back to me, facing the forest. "Sam!" I called her name as I got out the car. She didn't turn to look at me. Instead, she stood there, her messy red hair lifted by the breeze. I called to her again, a deep sense of unease in my bones. "Sam!" Slowly, she turned to face me. And that was when I saw her face. A skull. A distended jaw that opened much, much too wide. That was when she let out an ear-piercing scream. A sharp pain burst through my head, and I immediately clapped my hands over my ears. I tried screaming my wife's name again, but all I could hear was the shriek that started to feel like someone was knifing my brain. My vision swam and I stumbled backward. A dozen figures had appeared from the woods, all of them with skull-like faces, impossibly distended jaws, and the same milky white eyes that had replaced my wife's bright green ones. And they were all walking towards me. I didn't even think. I got in my car and started the engine, my ears bleeding from the sound of the scream. I ran. 2 days later, I'm couch surfing at a friend's after the doctors had dealt with one perforated eardrum. They told me I was lucky both my eardrums hadn't burst from the volume I was listening to music at. I just nodded and let them get on with it. There was a ringing in my ears I couldn't quite get rid of, no matter how I tried. There was no way I could explain what happened in those woods to them. I'm waiting for the ringing and headache to stop before I go looking for Sam again. This time, I will take a gun. I'll find her and I'll bring her home. I've already spoken to the police, but I know that they just aren't motivated to find her as me. My phone rings, and I gingerly held it to my good ear. It's a collect call from the prison. I accept it, because who else could possibly give me answers? It happened, didn't it? My father-in-law's gruff voice made me nearly drop the phone. I swallowed hard. Sam's gone, I said numbly. She's gone back to where she belongs, he said. You're lucky. How am I lucky? I asked, bitter anger surging through me. She was my wife and your daughter. That thing was no daughter nor a wife. It knows how to mimic being human. Why do you think I told you that story? His voice was low and even. My jaw dropped. Was he really suggesting he was the boy from the dark fairy tale he has told? You're cruel, disowning your daughter, trying to kill me. You should... Listen to me, boy. Listen good. That creature was dropped on my doorstep a few months after I came home from the forest. It was an infant then, and it butchered my parents. I found pieces of them all around the cabin for years. It then proceeded to kill everyone related to me, but it wouldn't let me die or kill me, and I couldn't figure out why, until I realized it needed me the way a parasite needs a host. Finally, when everyone I loved was dead and buried, it needed more prey, and it found you. It will take pieces of you, then keep you alive to take pieces of everyone you love. It will feed on your pain as you live through your own horror show. I swallowed hard. He had lost his damn mind, surely. What on earth was he trying to say? If I were you, I would take all my belongings and leave. Leave the state. Hell, leave the country. Don't ever look back, you hear me? Ever. With a sharp click, he hung up. I wish I'd listened to him. I wish I hadn't decided I need to rescue my wife at any cost. Instead, I'm sitting here in the dark, inside the old cabin, looking outside the window. My fingers folded around the hunting rifle. A sickle moon gleams silver, the only light in the jet-black night. And there, inside the darkness, I think I see a figure shimmer. From a distance, she almost looks like my wife. Almost. Until her inhuman skeletal jaw distends, and she screams. If you'd like more content like this, please like and subscribe.
I take late night drives. The things I've seen are unnatural. I've always suffered from insomnia, even from a young age, like 9 or 12. It's always plagued me. I usually just stay up doing meditative things until I fall asleep. That's before I got my car and driver's license. Now I just take long drives to the rural parts of my county where the woods and farmland are. No one is ever out on the road, so it's very peaceful. With that being said, it doesn't mean I'm alone on those dirt roads. The things I've seen have both horrified and intrigued me. I'll share a few experiences I've had on these stretches of lonely road. The figure. During one of my late night drives, I went further than I usually do. The road gets older and more overgrown in those parts. It basically leads to a very ancient forest with nothing but tire marks as a road. I'm driving, and all of a sudden, I catch something in my headlights. A tall, humanoid figure covered up by the bushes, facing a tree with his arms by its side. Blair Witch style. I've seen stuff like this before, so I just take a mental note of it and continue on exploring. For context, the things you encounter out here at night aren't necessarily hostile. They won't mess with you if you don't mess with them. I didn't see that particular figure for the rest of the night, and I didn't get a good look at them because of the bushes covering them. All I knew at the time that they were tall, I'm talking making basketball players look scrawny. Other than its freakish height, the proportions were all out of whack. One shoulder was huge and beefy, but had a twig-like arm attached to it, and the other shoulder was thin, but had a bodybuilder arm at the end of it. The night was pretty uneventful, so I decided to head back early and try to sleep. The next night was much more interesting. As per usual, I couldn't sleep, so I hopped in my car and drove to the rural dirt roads. I decided to head back into those deep woods to see if I could see that weird tall figure again. I'm driving slowly down this forest for 30 minutes, radio off, dead silent woods, and I don't see a thing, which is pretty uncommon not to see something weird. I closed my eyes and sighed, running my fingers through my hair. When I opened them, the figure was there. Misshapen body, arms at its side, facing the opposite direction. It was directly in front of my headlights, and I got a better look at it. This thing was wearing a filthy dark green trench coat with some torn brown jeans and boots splattered with mud. The figure's legs were also misshapen and uneven. One leg was swollen and was as thick as a car tire, while the other leg was literally just skin and bones. The hair on its back of its head waxed patchy and looked like a failed buzz cut. It stretched out its skinny arm like it was getting ready to point at something to the side. The figure's hands made finger scissors that opened and closed. I sat there completely in shock. My heart sank with the realization it was mocking me. A while back in school, I got bullied by this asshole who called me Snip Snip and would constantly make the same scissoring motion with his fingers. He called me this because, well, I'm a trans girl. I grunted in anger and gestured for this thing to move to the side. Its back was facing me, so I didn't see. I had serious thoughts of running this thing over, but I remembered if I don't mess with them, they won't harm me. I just drove around it and didn't dare look back in the rearview mirror to see its face. It was facing backwards for a reason. I see it from time to time, and it always is mocking me with gestures, mimicking something painful from my past. Sign language to mock my sibling who went deaf from an infection, waving a fist around violently to reference my physical ex. The gesture of holding a cigarette to make fun of my aunt who died of lung cancer, etc. This thing really just pisses me off more than anything. Its mutated ass body is kind of unnerving though. The Eater is a pretty common one to see on roads at night. My first encounter with it was just like all the other times I see this thing. It's semi-humanoid with pitch black skin and a very obese frame. It walks on all fours like a gorilla. It has tiny claws for hands. Its face is like a leech with dead, glazed over eyes on the sides of its neck, and the gross thing has a long tongue. I see it early on in my drives. The Eater's usually crouched over a corpse of a dead animal with a chunk of the carcass's meat in its tiny hands. The Eater just licks the meat with that huge tongue. It just laps up gore and blood. I don't think it hunts. It's more of a scavenger. The Eater is very docile and gets kind of curious when I pass by. It doesn't get too close though. Sometimes I'll throw some leftover dinner I have into the tall grasses for it. Skinless is one of those more dangerous things out in those woods. Whenever I see her, I immediately turn around and go straight home. She's a skinless woman, hence the name, in a white dress soaked in blood. Her flayed body is always bleeding, and she has a large butcher's knife clenched in her hand. She appears in the tall grass and will stumble towards your car slowly. She's slow, but she will catch up eventually. Skinless will stand by your driver's side window and tap her knife against the glass. She'll ask you if she's beautiful in a voice that echoes through your soul. It sounds like a much more demonic voice is speaking under hers. If you lock eyes with Skinless, you'll have the uncomfortable urge to gag or throw up. If you do throw up or gag, she'll violently smash your window and try to flay your skin off. I've only had this happen once, and I managed to speed off before she could shatter the window. She kept screaming on how she was going to skin me alive. If you do basically anything, she'll kill you. I haven't really bothered to try to say yes because it's nearly impossible with the crippling fear and that sick feeling you get in your stomach. The best option is just drive away before she catches up. Once you get out of those grasses and to civilization, you're pretty much fine. I may write about my first encounter with Skinless in a separate post. If you see her in the distance, just turn around and don't look back. Headlights. This is by far the most dangerous creature I've encountered on my drives. If you see this thing, you better go as fast as you can in the other direction and pray to every single goddamn deity you know. I almost stopped going on drives after I met this thing. Last month I was on a drive that was eerily calm. There was nothing, no wind, no rustling, not even any strange apparitions. I thought it was strange and slowed down slightly before driving. My eyes darting to every corner of the tall grass and the forest. There was absolutely nothing. Skinless usually scares off some other entities and animals, but she only appears once every couple of weeks. This was different. This continued until I reached an old farm at the edge of the tall grass. I usually pull to a crawl and look at the barn. Sometimes there are shadows or a strange ram-like creature that walks by the windows. Strangely, the absence of any horrible monster was making me afraid. That's when I saw it. Two huge headlights stabbing my eyes like two suns. I heard the rumble sputter of a damaged engine. It was in front of me. It was a 1940s style truck painted completely black. A sense of impending death fell over me like a macrame blanket, and I quickly fumbled with the stick shift to put my car in reverse. I nearly floored it as a scream erupted from inside the truck. The scream was not of this world. It ripped all the joy I had in my heart out and into the starless night. Whatever was driving that thing was pure evil. It was an ancient force of malice, like the boogeyman or the devil. The truck engine growled and it peeled after me while I was in reverse. I didn't have time to turn around, or else it would cut me off and crash into me. Eventually, I reached a clearing where I could turn around by putting all my weight into turning the steering wheel. I zoomed down the forgotten stretches of road with the truck in hot pursuit. My radio came to life with a piercing roar of static. It played an audio that still haunts me to this day. A woman was screaming in pure fear, a deep, primal howl of pure dread. In the background of her screams was that old "Here Comes the Boogeyman" song. A masculine voice could also be heard mumbling as it was slicing sound, and the woman's screams somehow got louder. I peered into the rear view again to see another horrible thing. 2 huge pale arms that were 6 feet long coming out from beneath the black truck. The hands balled into fists and tried to slam on my rear window, but I quickly swerved, almost hitting a tree. These pale arms coming from the truck galloped along the ground, helping it gain speed. I soared out of the old roads and pulled into a modern street and slammed the brakes at a gas station. As I caught my breath and refueled from that horrifying experience, I noticed my radio was spewing a choppy static that sounded like a dying moan. Yeah, I haven't been out driving for a while after. I'm thinking I'm gonna start taking a different route. So if you find yourself there, remember to chuck some old meat in the field, look out for skinless, and don't even think about heading to that barn.
A day had gone by without me having heard from Abby. I returned to the police station as I had been instructed by the sheriff when I first reported Abby as missing. 24 hours have been wasted. What do these small-town cops even have to do all day? I wondered as I left the motel. We were only supposed to stay a day in this town, in the middle of nowhere. Last night we took a short walk around town, had dinner at one of the Chinese restaurants, and while I wanted to go back to the motel, Abby wanted to go for a walk in the woods while the sun was still out. "I'll be fine, go back to the motel." I still curse myself for not going with her. I noticed a bald man with a scar on his left cheek standing outside the police station, staring at me as I entered the building. I found myself once again sitting opposite Sheriff McGill in his rather small office. Before, the sheriff appeared presentable, however now I clearly smelled alcohol on his breath. The mug that said "World's Best Father" was now being used as an ashtray. The sheriff had been smoking quite a lot, judging from the amount of cigarette butts in the mug. "So, still no word from Amy?" McGill said, while pinching the space between his eyes. "Abby," I corrected him. "And no, as I told you yesterday, something is wrong. She wouldn't go hours without contacting anyone," I said with thinly veiled annoyance and impatience in my voice. "Okay, son, here is what's going to happen," McGill said, as he looked at me sternly. "Officers will go search the woods. They are not going to find her." "How can you even—" I tried to interject, as McGill raised his finger. "Let me finish. You are going to go back to your motel room, and you are going to place salt on the window ledges and the doorstep. Later tonight you'll hear knocking on your door, and Abby will be on the other side of the door. You're not going to open the door. You're not going to let her inside." "Why the hell not?" I shouted, now standing, my face red with fury, at the man. Sheriff McGill handed me a piece of paper with a phone number on it. "Instead, you're going to call this number. I will deal with the situation. You will not open the door until I tell you to." McGill continued on as if my outburst did not happen. "You'll then leave the woodfall alone, and you'll never speak of this to anyone. To the rest of the world, Abby got lost in the woods. We did our best, but she was never found. Are we clear on that, son?" McGill said with an ominous undertone in his voice. I swung open the door of McGill's office and walked out of it, shouting a number of profanities and accusations at the behest of his intelligence. I saw McGill reaching for his phone and dialing a number. "You're going to need a clean-up at room 3 and prep the others. I heard him say as I stormed out of the sheriff's office. These small-town idiots are taking me for fools. Lazy assholes can't be bothered to investigate a missing person case. They're probably laughing their asses off, I thought, while crossing the road. Making my way back to the motel, I walked past East Gardens, the restaurant where Abby and I had dinner the night before. "Hey, Jason," I heard from behind me. When I turned around, I saw Jasmine, the waitress from the other night. "What is it with these cops? Abby disappeared when she went for a walk in the woods, and the arseholes aren't lifting a goddamn finger to find her." It began to rain a little, while a sombre expression replaced the cheery one that had been in Jasmine's face only moments ago. "She went missing in the woods, huh? Jason, she should never have gone into those woods. There are things there, old and strange. She's not the first to go missing in those woods, and she won't be the last." "What things?" I asked incredulously. "I couldn't tell you. There are so many stories, and let's be honest, you wouldn't believe any of them anyway, would you?" "No, I wouldn't," I said, walking away from Jasmine and the restaurant with a rapid pace and heavy breathing. Behind me, I heard footsteps keeping pace with my own. Whenever I turned around to look who was following me, there was no one there. I walked past the convenience store and went inside, heading straight for the liquor aisle, grabbed a bottle of vodka from the shelf, and when I turned around to head towards the cashier, I noticed the bald man with the scar on his left cheek entering the store. I stared at him until the man turned around and left. After paying for the vodka, I returned to his motel, struggling to find the keys to my room. I realized they weren't in my pocket. At the front office was an old woman. "I'm sorry, it seems I've lost my room key. Could you please give me a spare?" I asked as I sighed and rubbed my eyes. "Sure, no problem, honey. Is everything okay?" the woman asked, glaring at the bottle of vodka. "Nothing about any of this is okay. I'm sorry. Can I please just get my key? I have a long drive back to New York tomorrow." "Sure. I understand the police aren't much help, I take it. Are you going to leave without your girlfriend, though?" the woman asked. "Doesn't seem like I have much of a choice. But I will go to the police in New York. I'm not giving up on her." The woman nodded. "What's your room number again, honey?" Old age has made me forgetful. 3. "Yes, that's right. 3. Here you go." As I reached out for the key, I noticed a bag of salt on the floor behind the desk. And as I turned around to leave the front office, I noticed salt at the front ledges and at the doorstep. Angered by this superstition, I made a point to break up the line of salt at the doorstep out of spite. Once back in my room, I made quick work of the vodka, and vice versa, as soon as I passed out drunk on the bed. While I slept, the rain intensified. I woke up when lightning just hit outside the motel. I woke up drenched in sweat. The room was hot, musty, and humid. As I stumbled to the bathroom to take painkillers for my throbbing headache, I noticed there was salt on the window ledges and at the doorstep. Someone had been in my room whilst I was passed out drunk for this stupid superstition. "That arsehole," I said to myself as I remembered the bald man who'd been following me. When checking my pockets, if he had stolen anything, I noticed my car key and wallet were gone. The only thing left in the pocket was a piece of paper with the phone number Sheriff McGill had given me and the spare room key. Another flash of lightning forced my attention back to the window. I noticed on the outside of the window at least a dozen flies had gathered on it. They were more than twice the size of any fly I'd ever seen. Faintly, in the distance, I heard a low humming sound that quickly became louder, and I noticed the glass on the window started vibrating. The rain let up abruptly as more flies gathered on the window, when suddenly I heard a gentle but loud knocking on the door. When I approached the door, a foul odour overwhelmed me, sour and putrid, and something else I could not quite put my finger on, nor did I really want to. I rushed to the bathroom, no longer being able to resist the urge to throw up. "Get lost!" I yelled to the person on the other side of the door as I got up from the bathroom floor. "But Jason, it's me!" For a moment, it felt like time froze. I was delighted and overjoyed to hear Abby's voice. I rushed to the door and swung it open. Abby's legs were covered in long, deep lacerations, with a rash spreading around them. Her clothes were torn and stained with mud, blood, and other things I couldn't quite make out, and the awful smell now entered the room with full force. Flies buzzed around her. "What happened? Are you okay? How did you get those wounds?" I asked in quick succession. "I'm fine, Jason. I would just like to come inside. Can I come inside?" Abby replied in an oddly monotonous manner. "Of course you can." I paused. Looking down, I noticed smoke rising from the ground. The line of salt at the doorstep. It had begun to turn black and burnt smell rose up from it. "Can I come inside, Jason?" Abby repeated in the same monotonous voice. For a moment I pondered on the absurdity of this all. Why was she asking permission to come inside? How did McGill know this was going to happen? And what is going on with the now black salt? "Can I come inside, Jason?" Before I could answer her, I heard a loud bang coming from behind Abby, and she fell forward on her knees, letting out a high-pitched, inhuman scream. I saw McGill standing behind her, shotgun in hand, and pointed at Abby. Before I realised what was going on, he had reloaded, and there was another loud bang. This time he shot her in the back of the head, and she fell to the ground, screeching and convulsing before Abby became silent and would never move again. The flies flew away. I looked at him with tears in my eyes, understanding that while this was not Abby as I had known her, I did not know what was going on. "Rock salt," McGill said. He then pointed towards Abby's lifeless body. "Look, Jason, look at the shot wounds. Tell me what you see." For reasons that are still not entirely clear to me, I looked, and I saw writhing, blood-red, star-shaped plants woven through her body. Still weeping over Abby, I looked back up at McGill. "These are evil plants, son. Somehow they got inside her out in the woods. She died shortly after." This was not Abby, but a poor imitation by these plants, moving her body around like a puppet. "If you'd led her inside, you would have ended up like her as well," McGill said, while looking down at Abby's body. The plants had turned black and started to wither. Out of the front office came the bald man, now wearing a police uniform, handing me my keys and wallet back. "I'm really sorry about all of this. We couldn't let you leave until this was dealt with. She would have followed you. We can't let it spread beyond the town," the man said. "Now listen, son. Do not try to make any sense of this. You're not going to be able to. Take it from me. I've dealt with this before," McGill said, while looking dazed up at the sky. "Now we will take care of the body, and Abby will be another person that tragically got lost in the woods, right?" I did not answer. "Son, I'm gonna need to hear you say it. Abby got what?" "Lost in the woods," I replied numbly. But I cannot just keep quiet and let so many others meet the same fate as Abby. Now, I suspect a certain sheriff will be dropping by soon. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to support this channel, we have a link in the description for that. Don't forget to give a subscribe, a like, and press the bell to get notifications. Tell us your thoughts in the comments section. You can also send us your real or fictional horror stories.